คุณผู้ชมทราบหรือไม่ครับว่าตลอดทั้งประวัติศาสตร์ของมนุษยชาติเนี่ยมีมนุษย์เพียงแค่600คนเท่านั้นที่เคยเดินทางไปถึงอวกาศและหนึ่งในนั้นครับได้มานั่งพูดคุยกับผมในวันนี้เพราะว่าเราได้รับเกียรติจากคุณ Charles Gemar ที่จะมาเล่าประสบการณ์การที่เขาเดินทางไปถึงอวกาศมาแล้วถึง3ครั้งทั้งกับกระสวยอวกาศ Atlantis Discovery และ Columbia ว่าชีวิตการเป็นนักบินอวกาศการออกไปทำงานอยู่นอกโลกของเขาเนี่ยมันเป็นอย่างไรกันบ้างครับฝากกดไลค์กดแชร์คอนเทนต์นี้และมารับชมบทสัมภาษณ์สุดพิเศษได้กับรายการ Spacetalk ตอนที่1กันเลยครับสวัสดีครับคุณผู้ชมวันนี้ผมKornKTนะครับแขกรับเชิญของเราในวันนี้พิเศษมากๆเลยนะฮะเพราะว่าเราได้อดีตนักบินอวกาศที่เคยขึ้นบินกับ3ภารกิจกระสวยอวกาศมานั่งพูดคุยกับเรานะฮะซึ่งเดี๋ยววันนี้จะคุยกับคุณแซมนะฮะว่าชีวิตการทำงานอยู่บนอวกาศของเขาเป็นอย่างไรนะครับ so สวัสดีครับคุณแซมnice to have you with us once again.
Oh, thank you.
We met before early in this week, but for today I want you to talk to more about your job. As many people seen from your ways that you are a former astronaut. First thing first, I want you to talk like your experience that why do you want to choose to become an astronaut?
Sure. The primary reason, I mean, my family and my parents always were heavily involved in community, and for me, it was always wanted a job that made a difference in people's lives. And I think working as an astronaut, I mean, everything we do in space is about creating a better life here on Earth. And so, for me, it was an opportunity to give back and do something that's really fun, exciting, but at the same time very meaningful.
So as you said, it's fun, exciting, and meaningful. Let's talk before you become an astronaut.
Sure.
You have to go through a lot of like the application process and training and all kind of stuff. How hard is that process before you actually become one?
Well, I would say that's the hardest part. Being an astronaut is that whole application process, and understand that, it's a very competitive process. I mean, the year I was selected, we probably had 5,000 applicants. Many highly qualified applicants, more qualified than I was, and yet we only had 13 slots. So the competition is pretty keen. But you fill out the paperwork. I mean, the application is quite involved. It probably took me 6 weeks just to complete the application, make sure that it was complete before I ever submitted it. And once you do that, you just hope for the best. I mean, there's nothing more you can do, right? And fortunately, I got called for an interview, and the rest is somewhat history.
You got a chance to go up to space for 3 times with 3 different space shuttles.
Correct.
You went with the Atlantis, with the Discovery, and the Columbia. How do you prepare yourself? Like when you know that you were selected for a mission to go on the space shuttle, how did you train before each mission?
Sure. Yeah. So once you're selected for a mission, I mean, before that, you go through a couple years worth of what we call astronaut candidate training, just to kind of teach you the basic background and core subjects, if you will. Once you're selected for a mission, you're going to go through another year of mission-specific training. And again, it's going to be a lot of simulator time. There's going to be some classroom time. You're going to learn firefighting techniques. You're going to visit the payload community, your primary payloads and secondary community, and train with them on their specific payloads. Those are just an example. You're going to learn geography and photographic techniques and all of the kind of the tertiary missions associated with spaceflight. That's going to take a year. Before you ever get your first chance to fly in a spacecraft, you're going to spend 21 years in formal education and training. Primary school, college, astronaut candidate, and then mission-specific training.
Wow. Before you're going up for a launch mission, the night before, how do you prepare yourself, actually knowing that the next day you will be up on space?
Well, there's always a couple things that take place that night before. One is we have a traditional barbecue with our guests. We're only allowed to have 4 guests during the week before launch. All of them have to be cleared by a flight surgeon to make sure that we don't pick up any bacterial infections or viral infections or anything. We're not allowed to have contact with our minor children under the age of 18. They just tend to be little virus magnets. So we're not allowed to have any contact with children. But the night before, we always have a traditional barbecue. So it's going to be maybe your spouse or significant other, parents if they're alive, grandparents, brother and sister. You get to choose. For me, that's always an awkward time because as an engineer, mentally, I'm already starting to march out to the launch pad. Right, I got a big job to do tomorrow, and beans and and Frank's is a bit of a is a bit of a distractor, right? But for the families, it's an important time because this is, their time to kind of spend time with you. And the reality is, space flight it's a hazardous occupation. There's no guarantees that they're going to see you. Hopefully you'll have a homecoming, but as we know from experience, that's not always the case. So the families are nervous, they're proud, they're apprehensive, they're excited, they're all these emotions. But for the astronauts, mentally, we're starting to make that transition. And then families will go back to Cocoa Beach and spend the night in a local hotel, and we'll go back to crew quarters and spend the night. And I would say that is the hardest part of the spaceflight experience, is when you're alone in your room and you're faced with tomorrow not knowing what the outcome will be.
When you spend the time with the family and then they all went back and you have to be there alone. But on the next day, when you actually on the crew SSR, walking into the space shuttle, to getting into your seat, like I want you to talk about the experience during that time, like how hard is it?
That part's the easy part. I mean, once you get through the night, you transition, right? So whatever apprehension or hesitation, nervousness, butterflies, that's all gone. You've got a big job to do, and you've trained hard for it. You've dreamed of this day, and you just go out there and do it. It's an exciting time.
And when you actually got into the Earth orbit, feeling the weightlessness environment, what is the feeling of that time, like compared to all your training, everything you have done underwater or on the flight? How does it feel? Is it different or not?
Well, I think that once those main engines shut down and you're safely on orbit, it's a big sigh of relief, because you know that probably the most dangerous part of the mission is now behind you. I mean, it only lasts 8 minutes and 34 seconds, but it is the most dangerous 8 minutes and 34 seconds of the entire mission. So it's a sigh of relief. And now you're just getting used to weightlessness. So a whole bunch of things take place when we get to orbit. We're going to basically check out the spacecraft systems, and the Mission Control Center is looking over the vehicle to make sure that everything is working properly. And then they're going to give us a go for on-orbit operations. So that usually takes 90 minutes to 3 hours, depending on how involved that is. So in the meantime, people are starting to prepare the mid-deck. The commander and the pilot and the lead flight engineer stay in their seats on the flight deck, and they're monitoring systems, and they're talking to the Mission Control Center and make sure the spacecraft is ready for orbit. The other two mission specialists are starting to reconfigure the spacecraft. We don't do a lot of reconfiguring, because if they tell us, no, you have to come home, then we don't want to reassemble everything, So we kind of do a few things, but for the most part, until we get that go for mission operations or on-orbit operations, we'll limit the amount of kind of breakdown, because we're going to take down the seats and stow those away. We're going to take off our suits and stow those away. But those of us on the flight deck for the first couple 2-3 hours are going to stay in our suit and wait for that go for on-orbit operations.
So after you are go for on-orbit operations, surely you have to spend a lot of time on orbit. I want you to talk about living on space. Like, first thing first, how was the food up there?
Well, the food is not nearly as good as the food I've had all week here. That's for sure. It's like cafeteria food. It's okay. You can live off of. You wouldn't want to make it a daily occurrence for the rest of your life.
How much food do you have to prepare? Like, do you have any contingency kind of food, or some weird food that you didn't want to try?
Well, so there's really nothing that we won't eat that goes up with us. So the dietitians allow us to sample all the food. So they put out the samples, and we taste test it, and then we grade it from 1 to 10. And I would say that if it doesn't get at least a 5 or higher, they won't put it on board for us. So every crew member has their own designated meals. So they'll balance the meals, they'll balance the caloric intake, they'll balance the meals for nutritional value, and then they'll color code all of our choices, and they'll separate them by day one breakfast, day one lunch, day one dinner, et cetera, so that we kind of have that. But generally, there's nothing on board that you're going to find offensive, at least in your menu. You may find my food offensive, but for me, it's good. Yeah.
Okay, so for your son, it's already good.
That's right.
To steal from the other.
Now, occasionally during meal prep, usually we have one person designated to do all the prep. So let's say, for example, I see something on your menu selection that I particularly like. Occasionally, an astronaut will take their designated circle and move it to your food and put yours on mine. So
that happens.
That happens occasionally. So I've heard.
Okay. Okay. It doesn't happen to you yet.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I've heard it has. Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. Wow, that even happened with the astronaut as well.
Oh yes.
So from that one, from intensity of fighting for the food, let's go back to lighter stuff during your sleep time.
Sure.
So for Space Shuttle, you have a crew of maybe 4 to 7 or maybe sometimes 8 people. How do you find a space in the Space Shuttle to sleep? Only on the mid deck, or do you have any extension area to sleep?
That is highly dependent on the commander. So, for example, the commanders that I flew with, they didn't want you sleeping on the flight deck for a number of reasons. If you're on the flight deck, it's hard to resist the urge to open the windows and look outside in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
And you have the potential then to wake up the rest of the crew, right? Because light is going to be flooding in. We close off all the shades in the windows. We blacken those out so that it's a true nighttime environment. So generally, the commanders don't like to see you sleep on the flight deck. So everybody generally will find a place on the mid deck, and it can be anywhere. I mean, for me, I always hung on the starboard wall, just kind of laying on my side, suspended between the front and the back. The commander, he would be suspended closer to the ceiling. I had one crew member that just kind of rolled up in a ball in a corner. Another one that spread their sleeping bag between the lockers. It's highly dependent on the crew, but there's plenty of real estate because remember, I mean, the mid deck on the shuttle, not true of station, but on shuttle, is only about 50% larger than this table.
Ooh.
So we have 7 people, potentially 8, all in this space, but you get to use all of the volume, right? It's not just the square footage.
Lay flat on the floor.
You can float between each other, suspend yourself. So there's a lot more room than you think because you get to use all of the cubic volume.
So do you feel comfortable?
Oh yeah, yeah. Your body is completely supported by weightlessness. I mean, it just there's no hot spots, there's no discomfort. You're just floating free.
And do you when you spend your time on the Space Shuttle, sometimes it took a really long week. Do you have a weekend, a holiday to spend up there? And if you have, what do you spend most of the time up there with?
Sure. On a 5-day mission, or actually shorter than 14 days, they don't schedule any off time. At least when I was flying. So you're timelined 16 hours every day, and on my last mission, it was a 14-day mission, they gave us a 4-hour break. Now, having said that, there's still plenty of things that have to be done, right? And the ground did not hesitate to call us and ask us if we could do this or do that. I mean, so that, even though it's scheduled time off, you're never really off the clock.
So you have to be ready when the mission control calls.
Yeah, we can't say sorry. We're not here today. Call back tomorrow.
Wow. But that's the bad part of it. Is that you have to always be ready when on space. And when you come back down to Earth, do you have to adapt to life back on Earth as well, or it's just normal seamless transition come back down from space?
Yeah. So the transition to space actually is easier than the transition home. So your body has been deconditioned. You've lost blood volume. You've lost bone mineral content, muscle mass. and all of those things are taking place while you're in space. So when you come home, there's a readaptation, and it's not that you've lost so much muscle mass that you can't stand up and do those simple things. It's just that the brain has to recalibrate itself. Because remember, I mean, we've just been up there. All you have to do is just kind of think about it, and off you'll float, right? But now I have to actually stand up for the first time, and the longer the duration mission, the more difficult that transition. And then, of course, the physical conditioning to get back to your pre-flight level conditioning can take anywhere from a few days to a few months, depending on your age and how long you were in orbit. Yeah.
So have you ever been like trying to get a cup of water and then somehow fell off? Does that ever happen to you?
That's never happened to me, but I will admit on the first day I was home, I did wake up in the middle of the night thinking that I was still weightless. You know, it didn't cause any unintended consequences. It was just a mental state. But I did have that impression that I was still in space. I was kind of dreaming that I was still there. But like I said, I didn't have any tendency to act on it.
When you say about dreaming or being up there, does you dream in space and it is different from one on Earth?
You do dream in space, and I don't remember anything remarkably different, right?
Like being on the Earth, it's the same thing.
Yeah, same thing. You know, yeah.
Okay, so that's clear up one of the things I have in. Well, so after you come back and then you retire from NASA, right now you are working as the ambassador for Skill Up, and then you are doing a lot of STEM education. I want you to talk about this a little bit more. Like, why do you want to shift your focus to education after your retirement and everything?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, we all have an obligation, right? I mean, I've been blessed. I had a great career, had the opportunity to work with incredible talent all over the world. That continues today with Skill Up and Umbrella Education. You know, so again, it gets back to that public service, that community service. And yesterday I spoke at one of the universities in Chiang Mai, and you know, you look out there in the students, and like I said, what I see is a reflection of me 50 years ago, right? And so having the opportunity to visit with the students and hopefully inspire, talk about their futures and their careers, it's rewarding. Right. I mean, whatever world I left you and my generation has left you, it's up to you now, right? Right. It's now up to you. And so, like I said, it's being involved in that. And I think that the STEM up skills, we talk about everything around us today. I mean, just think of this podcast, right? All the STEM careers that went into producing this, producing the computers, the cameras, the microphones, the desks, the table, the clothes that we wear. All of that started with, an idea in somebody's head, had to transfer to a piece of paper or a CAD/CAM design, had to go to a manufacturing process, a delivery process, a point of sale, and eventually ended up right here in this room. So all of that is STEM.
Okay, so last question for you. After everything you said about the STEM education and the story that you have been told about your career as being astronaut, what would be the one key thing you want to give advice to the children watching you today? They want to grow up being an astronaut like you or do a career like you?
Well, I think you're having a dream, having a goal, and having the perseverance to pursue it, right? Is important, and finding and developing mentors, people that will help you in your goals, because nobody has done this for the first time for the most part. There's people that have worked in the career field that you want to work in. There were people that I looked to as mentors, and they guided me through my career. And so, I think that mentorship, is important, establishing high expectations for yourself and then dedicating the effort necessary to reach those. And even if ultimately you don't reach that goal, you will still have accomplished so much in your life and have lived a rewarding life.
Okay, thank you very much for your time and for all the guidance, all the information.
Well, thank you.
Talk about your life on the space shuttle today.
ก็วันนี้ครับเป็นเรื่องราวที่เกี่ยวกับชีวิตของนักบินอวกาศอย่างคุณแซนเกอร์มานะครับทั้งการอยู่บนกระสวยอวกาศชีวิตก่อนที่เขาจะเข้ามาเป็นนักบินอวกาศและก็ผลงานที่เขาทำหลังจากนั้นนะครับก็วันนี้ขอบคุณทุกคนมากที่รับชมกัน and thank you very much for coming to our studio today
Well thank you
และทั้งหมดนี้ครับคือเรื่องราวที่เราได้พูดคุยกับคุณชาร์ลส์ เกมาอดีตนักบินอวกาศของ NASA จากสมัยโครงการกระสวยอวกาศนะครับและเป็นตอนแรกของรายการ Spacetalk รายการใหม่ของเราที่จะพาทุกคนไปพูดคุยกับนักดาราศาสตร์นักบินอวกาศและบุคลากรที่ทำงานในด้านนี้ครับจากทั่วโลกกันเลยลองคอมเมนต์มาบอกกันได้ครับว่าในตอนต่อไปเนี่ยอยากให้ใครมาเป็นแขกรับเชิญและสำหรับ EP นี้ครับต้องขอบคุณทาง Skill Up และ Umbrella Education ด้วยนะครับสามารถติดตามรายละเอียดเพิ่มเติมและเข้าไปลองดู e-learning platform แห่งนี้ได้ที่ลิงก์ในคำอธิบายข้างล่างของวิดีโอกันเลยนะครับและอย่าลืมกดไลค์กดแชร์วิดีโอนี้พร้อมกับกดติดตามช่องKornKTเพื่อไม่พลาดเรื่องราวข่าวสารอวกาศที่น่าสนใจหรือจะส่งเป็น Super Thanks และ Super Stickers เข้ามาสนับสนุนการทำงานของเราก็ได้นะครับสำหรับวันนี้ขอบคุณคนมากๆที่รับชมถึงตอนนี้ผมKornKTต้องขอตัวลาไปก่อนนะครับสวัสดีครับ